Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Brooke Logan had always believed she could survive anything: scandal, betrayal, heartbreak, public humiliation, even Ridge Forrester himself, but nothing prepared her for the moment she realized she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror inside her bedroom at the mansion. A woman who had spent decades fighting for a place in the Forrester world only to discover that she was now clinging to the remnants of a life that didn't love her the way she had loved it, and the truth, sharp, bitter, undeniable, finally sank into her bones with a heaviness she could no longer ignore as she whispered to herself, maybe this is the end of the Brooke they knew. She didn't cry, not at first, she just stood there, shoulders slightly trembling, hands resting on the edge of the vanity, feeling the air shift around her as if the house itself sensed something was collapsing inside her. Downstairs, the Forrester mansion buzzed with its usual quiet tension, too many memories, too many wars fought in the name of love, too many whispers in corners about who belonged and who didn't, but Brooke felt for the first time in her life that she wasn't part of the rhythm anymore, like the pulse of the place no longer matched her own. Ridge had said a lot of things over the years, promises made when he was trying to keep the family together, apologies after nights of anger, declarations of love that once felt eternal, but the words he spoke earlier that afternoon still echoed through her mind, sharp and cold, cutting deeper than he probably intended, even if he truly believed he was acting out of honesty. He had looked at her with those conflicted eyes, the ones that never seemed to know what they wanted, and told her that something in him had changed, that he didn't know how to fix what felt broken, and that maybe forcing the pieces back together would only make things worse. Brooke had nodded because that was all she could do, but inside her, something cracked so loudly she wondered if he heard it too. She wasn't angry at him, not really, she was exhausted, worn down by years of being the woman who loved too fiercely, who held on too tightly, who forgave more than she should have just to keep Ridge close, but as she looked at her reflection now, she realized that the version of herself she had been building her life around was gone, and she couldn't keep pretending otherwise. She began packing slowly, methodically, folding clothes with the kind of precision that only comes from a heart trying to distract itself from shattering, placing jewelry into small velvet cases, touching each item as if saying goodbye to a part of her past. Memories rushed through her mind, her wedding to Ridge at the beach, the time he carried her across the threshold of this house, the night she held him while he confessed he didn't know how to choose between two lives that both felt like home, the countless moments of passion and heartbreak that defined them, and for the first time in years, she let herself ask the question she had always shoved away, what if I deserve more than this? The thought jolted her. Not because it felt wrong but because it felt dangerously true. Just as she zipped one of her suitcases shut, she heard footsteps outside her door, Ridge's steps, slow at first, then stopping as if he was gathering the courage to knock. Brooke didn't turn around, she didn't need to. She already knew why he was there. "Brooke," he finally said, voice low, almost fragile, as if he could feel the shift happening before he even saw it. She didn't answer immediately. She wanted to choose her words carefully, to speak for herself rather than the version of her he had always expected her to be. When she finally turned, Ridge was standing there in the doorway, eyes widening as he saw the suitcases on the bed. "You're leaving," he whispered, disbelief lacing every syllable, like he never imagined she would actually walk away even though he had practically pushed her to this point with his uncertainty, his fear, his chronic inability to stand still long enough to appreciate what they had. "I have to," Brooke replied softly, not with anger but with a heartbreaking calmness that threw Ridge off balance. "I can't stay here waiting for you to decide if I'm enough. I can't keep fighting for a place in your life that you can't promise me anymore." Ridge stepped inside the room, hands slightly shaking, his breath catching as he tried to form words that wouldn't come. For once, he didn't have a speech, didn't have a defense, didn't have some poetic half-truth about destiny or fate or the complicated nature of love. He just looked wounded, confused, and maybe even afraid. "Brooke, we always find our way back," he stammered, clinging to the same line he had used for decades, as if history could rewrite itself yet again. She shook her head gently. "Not this time, Ridge. Because I'm finally choosing myself." The silence that followed was crushing. Ridge tried to close the distance between them, but Brooke held up her hand, not to reject him, but to stop him from speaking words she knew would weaken her resolve. "Please," she said quietly. "Don't make this harder." Ridge's chest rose and fell unevenly, his eyes darting around the room as memories flooded him too, every moment he had taken for granted, every promise he hadn't kept, every second he had assumed Brooke would always be there waiting. "I didn't think you'd ever leave me," he finally admitted, voice cracking in a way Brooke had heard only a handful of times in her life. "Maybe that was the problem," she whispered. She walked past him, suitcase in hand, feeling the weight of decades lifting off her shoulders even as her heart throbbed painfully against her ribs. As she reached the stairs, she caught a glimpse of the family portraits lining the hallway, Forresters everywhere, smiling, united, perfect, and she felt strangely free knowing she didn't have to try to fit into that picture anymore. Downstairs, the air felt different. The house that had once felt like a kingdom now seemed like a museum of memories she no longer needed to preserve. She paused by the living room, letting her eyes trace the familiar lines of the fireplace where so many arguments had erupted, where so many reconciliations had begun, where she had stood beside Ridge countless times believing they were stronger than any force trying to tear them apart. But now she understood that love wasn't supposed to feel like a battlefield you never stopped bleeding on. Love wasn't supposed to make you question your worth every time someone else wanted something different. And so, with a deep breath that felt like her first one in years, she walked toward the door. Ridge appeared at the top of the stairs just as she reached the handle. "Brooke," he called out, voice tinged with desperation. She didn't turn immediately, she wanted to hold on to her strength for just a moment longer. When she finally lifted her gaze to meet his, she saw a man who had realized too late what he was losing. "I love you," Ridge whispered, voice breaking with the weight of a truth that had come too late. Brooke smiled softly, but it wasn't the smile of a woman who hoped he would chase her. It was the smile of a woman who finally understood that loving someone didn't mean sacrificing herself anymore. "I know," she said. "And I'll always care about you. But I need to love myself too." With that, she opened the door, feeling the cool air wash over her like a promise of something new, something hers, something free. Ridge took one step down the stairs, then another, but he stopped halfway as if suddenly aware that this moment wasn't his to control. He watched in stunned silence as Brooke Logan, the woman who had once been the center of his universe, the queen of Forrester's most unforgettable eras, the love he'd always assumed would be waiting right where he left her, walked away from him without looking back. And for the first time in his life, Ridge Forrester understood what it felt like to lose Brooke not because of another man, or a misunderstanding, or a scandal, but because she finally realized she deserved better than the love he kept offering in pieces. The door closed softly behind her, but to Ridge, it sounded like the final echo of a chapter he never believed would truly end, a chapter that left him standing alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, and too empty without the woman who had always been its heartbeat. As Brooke reached the driveway, her steps slowed, not because she doubted her decision but because she felt the gravity of what she had just walked away from settling over her like a final, bittersweet curtain closing on a stage she had performed on for most of her adult life. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus and roses from the garden Ridge loved so much, and for a moment, she let herself absorb the quiet, letting the world still itself around her the way it never did inside the Forrester mansion. Her car waited at the end of the drive, gleaming under the soft afternoon light, but she didn't rush towards it. She stood there breathing, centering herself, trying to untangle the decades of emotions that clung to her heart like vines. Behind her, the front door hadn't opened again, but she felt Ridge's presence lingering like a ghost in the windows, watching her leave, wishing he could rewind every second that led them here. Brooke closed her eyes, and memories tumbled through her first days walking into Forrester Creations, young and optimistic, Ridge looking at her like she was someone he didn't understand but couldn't look away from, the way he used to say her name like it was a promise, not a burden. She didn't want to hold on to the heartbreak anymore, she wanted to honor the woman she was becoming, the woman who refused to stay in rooms where she was an afterthought. When she finally took another step toward the car, her phone buzzed inside her purse, breaking the stillness. She hesitated before reaching for it, half expecting Ridge's name to appear, but it wasn't him. It was Hope. Her daughter's voice was soft, tentative when Brooke answered, as if she somehow already knew something was wrong. "Mom, are you okay?" Hope asked, and Brooke's breath stilled, not because she wanted to hide the truth but because saying it out loud would make it real. "I'm leaving the mansion," she said simply. There was a pause on the other end, a pause filled with shock, concern, and that protective tenderness only a daughter could have for a mother who had spent too many years breaking silently. "Did something happen with Ridge?" Hope finally whispered. Brooke swallowed hard, her throat tightening with emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in front of Ridge. "Something happened inside me," she said, her voice steady but fragile. "I realized I can't keep living this life if it keeps hurting more than it heals." Hope didn't respond right away. Brooke could practically hear her daughter processing every word, trying to decide how to support her without making her feel weak. "Do you want me to come get you?" Hope asked gently. Brooke allowed herself a small, grateful smile. "No, sweetheart. I need to do this part alone." But Hope wasn't ready to let go. "Mom. I'm proud of you. More than you know." The words hit something tender inside Brooke, a place Ridge's words rarely reached, and for a moment, her vision blurred with emotion she had been fighting all day. "Thank you," Brooke whispered before ending the call, clutching the phone like an anchor. She took another step toward the car, but before she could reach the door, she heard the creak of the mansion entrance behind her. She didn't want to turn around. She didn't want to see Ridge standing there with regret carved into every line on his face, but her body reacted before her resolve could stop her. She turned. And there he was. Ridge stood on the front steps, shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets like a man who had lost something he never imagined he would have to fight to keep. He didn't call out to her this time, he just looked at her with a pain that seeped through the quiet distance between them. Brooke felt her heart twist, not with longing, but with the ache of loving someone who wasn't meant to stay. She lifted her chin slightly, offering him the gentlest nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been and everything they could no longer be. Ridge stepped down one stair, then another, stopping halfway down the path as if he feared that getting too close would break whatever dignity either of them had left. "I thought you'd come back inside," he finally said, his voice low, raw. Brooke shook her head. "I can't." Ridge's jaw tightened as he tried to control the emotions she could see tearing him apart. "I didn't want this," he said. "I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," Brooke replied softly. "And maybe that's the clearest sign that something has to change." Ridge looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't know how to live without you," he murmured. Brooke inhaled slowly, letting the breeze steady her. "You'll figure it out." "We both will." Their eyes met, two people bound by decades of love and mistakes, standing on opposite sides of a moment that would define the rest of their lives. Ridge opened his mouth, searching for words, but Brooke raised her hand again, not to silence him, but to release him. "Goodbye, Ridge," she said, her voice breaking in all the right places. Ridge swallowed hard, his eyes glossing with unshed tears. "Goodbye, Logan." The nickname, his nickname, hit her like a final goodbye woven into the fabric of everything they once were. She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer, then turned away before she could fall apart. The sound of her suitcase wheels rolling across the pavement filled the air, louder than any argument they had ever had. She opened her car door, her hands trembling, not from regret but from the overwhelming sense of freedom beginning to spread through her chest like sunlight. As she slid into the driver's seat, she looked at the mansion one last time, the place where she had loved too hard, stayed too long, and finally found the strength to walk away. Ridge remained frozen on the walkway, helplessly watching as she started the engine. Brooke took one last deep breath, whispered to herself, "This time I'm choosing me," and drove away from the Forrester estate, leaving behind not just a house, not just a man, but the version of herself that had waited far too long to be seen. Brooke drove without a destination, letting the city blur past her as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long streaks of gold across the windshield, each one flickering like a silent reminder that she was entering a new chapter she never prepared for but had long needed. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel every time a familiar landmark appeared: Forrester Creations, the cliff road Ridge once confessed his love on, the small cafe where she used to meet Hope for lunch, but she kept driving, refusing to let nostalgia pull her backward. The weight in her chest remained heavy, but something beneath it, something quiet, something brave, began calling her forward. She eventually found herself pulling into the parking lot of a small overlook above Malibu, a place she hadn't visited since her early days with Ridge when they were young, hopeful, and far simpler than life ever allowed them to be. She stepped out of the car, the ocean breeze brushing against her skin like a gentle reminder that the world was bigger than the battle she fought in the Forrester home. The waves crashed rhythmically below, steady and certain, and Brooke let their power soothe the tightness in her throat until the tears finally spilled, soft at first, then heavier, falling in quiet streams she didn't bother to wipe away. She wasn't crying for Ridge, she wasn't crying for the marriage that had fallen apart again. She was crying for the years she had spent holding everything together, crying for the younger version of herself who thought love meant sacrificing everything, crying for all the times she stayed silent when she should have spoken her pain aloud. When the wind shifted, it carried her tears away, and Brooke closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her like a baptism into a life she didn't yet know how to live. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Ridge stood motionless at the front door long after her car disappeared from view, his breath unsteady as he pressed a trembling hand against the doorframe she had just walked through. He felt like the house had swallowed all the air the moment she left, leaving behind a stillness that suffocated him. He walked back inside, every step echoing in the silence, and he found himself staring at the empty chair in the living room, her chair, where she used to curl up with a glass of wine, laughing at his stubbornness or gently chastising him when he was too proud to apologize. He rubbed his face, pacing, replaying their final moments over and over until it felt like every heartbeat twisted deeper into his chest. He had always believed Brooke would come back, no matter what happened between them. That was their pattern, their story, their destiny, or at least the version of destiny he had selfishly clung to. But tonight, for the first time, he felt the terrifying realization that she might truly be gone, and his throat tightened with panic at the thought. Upstairs, her absence was even louder. The room smelled like her perfume, soft and warm, and Ridge walked inside instinctively, as if drawn by a force he couldn't resist. Her suitcase imprint still pressed into the comforter. Her hairbrush lay on the vanity, a few blonde strands still tangled in the bristles. A silk scarf was draped over the corner of the bedpost, something she must have forgotten, and Ridge picked it up, his fingers tightening as he brought it slowly to his chest. "Logan," he whispered into the empty room, his voice cracking with regret. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands, finally allowing the grief to pour out of him, a raw, aching torrent of emotion he didn't try to hide. For once, Ridge Forrester, the man who always had an answer, always had a plan, felt completely lost. Downstairs, the house creaked softly as darkness settled in, and Ridge finally forced himself to move, wandering until he reached the study. He poured himself a drink, but even the familiar burn of scotch did nothing to steady him. He tried calling her, once, twice, but each attempt went straight to voicemail, and he stared at the phone like it had betrayed him. "Brooke, please, just call me," he whispered, his thumb hovering over her name again, but he didn't press it this time. Instead, he walked to the window, staring into the night, the garden lights glowing faintly on the flowers she once helped plant with such hope. At that exact moment, across town, Brooke was sitting on a bench overlooking the water, watching the horizon fade into twilight. Her tears had dried, but her breathing remained uneven as she tried to understand what freedom felt like after so many years of struggle. She didn't feel as strong as she hoped she would. She felt raw, fragile, but also, somewhere buried beneath the hurt, relieved. For the first time in a long time, there was no one asking her to compromise, no one expecting her to fix things, no one questioning her worth. There was only herself, and the quiet hum of the ocean, and the sky turning the color of memories she didn't need to hold on to anymore. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. She knew it was Ridge. Instead, she leaned back slightly, letting her head rest against the wooden bench, closing her eyes as the weight she had carried for decades slowly began lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would figure out where she would stay, how she would rebuild, how she would explain this to the rest of the family. Tomorrow, she would start healing. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply exist, hurt, exhausted, but free. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a spark began to flicker, faint but alive, hope not tied to Ridge, not tied to Forrester, not tied to anyone but herself. A new beginning, quietly waiting to unfold.